So I'm working on a pretty cool project that I think may have some value or some use for some friends and family. I know a lot of my friends and family or whatever, they have RVs or trailers or whatever. And Starlink has been kind of a game changer for people with RVs or trailers because it enables you to get high-speed internet, truly high-speed internet, anywhere using the Starlink system. It's kind of spendy, but it works. It works really well. There's no complaints there. But it's a pain in the ass at times to use it, and I'm going to get into that in a minute and show you why that's so. And so I'm getting ready to do a major modification to our coach. I'm going to cut open this perfectly good Starlink. I'm going to take this Dremel tool right here, and I'm going to cut the back out of this Starlink antenna, and I'll show you what the plan is. But it's already out of warranty, so I mean, and I'm not the first person to do this. There's a lot of people before me that have done it. Some with limited success. Some have absolutely ruined their Starlink satellite dishes. There's guys on the internet that have used angle grinders and saws and all kinds of things trying to achieve what I'm going to try and do also. But then there's some really smart people that have figured out how to do it right. But I guess first I'll give you some backstory on why we need this. So here's our motor home. It's a Thor Tuscany, and you can see up on the roof we have an old school like rabbit ears kind of antenna, and then a DirecTV satellite dish, which we don't use anymore. We stopped using that about 2 months ago, and I'll get more into that because it's related to this project. But the problem is, in order to use the Starlink, it's a pain in the ass. First of all, you can't use it while you're in motion. And then when you stop, you have to pull the antenna out of the basement. And then there's a long pole you have to pull out. You have to set this pole. Well, I'm going to go to the back. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about. Okay, so here we are in the back. And anyway, there's a long pole we have to get out of the basement. And then we have to put this pole up through that, right up there at the top of the ladder. It's kind of like a guide. Well, first of all, I have to get a step stool out, you know, because I'm only 5'10", so I'm not that tall. I get a step stool out. I have to get up on it. I have to get the cord out of the other side. It's on a reel. I have to go up through this cup right there, which is on the first rung. And then once I go through that, I have to go through the long tube that I just took out of the basement. Then I have to attach the Starlink to it. And it's awkward and heavy for one thing, especially if the wind is blowing hard. Then I have to put that pole up through that guide and then work it back, the base of it back down into this cup. Then turn the Starlink to the north and then lock it in. And then go inside, turn the modem on. It's about a 15-minute process. No joke. I've done it in like 10 minutes, but normally it takes me about 15 minutes to do all that. So it's awesome. It works great, but it's a pain. This weekend I'm going to take this goofy DirecTV, and actually I'm going to take the over-the-air antenna. I'm taking both of these down because they're totally irrelevant now once I get the Starlink up there. So yesterday I got up there and removed the DirecTV satellite dish, got it off. I also removed that goofy rabbit ears looking TV antenna thing, because we actually get all of our TV, local channels, everything through our YouTube TV and our Starlink, so it's really unnecessary. I may actually put a different style up at some point, but right now the focus is to get the Starlink flat mounted up there. Now you're probably going to say, well, wait a minute, doesn't that thing have to be pointed to the north? And and all that, and if you flat mount it, how you're going to do that, etc., etc. And that used to be true back when they only had a couple hundred Starlink satellites, but they have so many up there now, and they're putting more all the time, that the phased array on the Starlink antenna, it works just fine flat mounted. And proof of that is they now have a flat mount antenna. They call it their high performance one. It's like twice the size of a standard one, but it's really expensive. It's like $2,500. So I'll stick with my standard antenna, and we're going to try and flat mount it. And there was a process to do that, and I'm going to go over that in a minute. So before I say anything else about this project, it's time for a huge shout out, because all the stuff I'm doing, you know, with cutting the back off and getting ready to flat mount it and all that, that's all great, but it's all on the outside, because without this, none of it is possible. This is the Starlink cradle that the Starlink will fit into and get flat mounted on the roof. Now, there's a couple, you know, entrepreneurs out there that are making these, like this one and other ones that are similar. Some of them are cut out of a solid piece of, you know, CNC plastic or whatever. But there was a guy on the internet that designed this one and freely shared the CAD files for 3D printing. Now, I don't know anything about 3D printing, so I put something on Facebook looking for a recommendation for a 3D printer. And when I did that, my awesome cousin Brian contacted me and said, dude, just send me those CAD files and I'll print it for you on my 3D printer. So he did that for me. He printed this whole thing up on his 3D printer. All I had to do was, when I got the parts, is assemble it and put these aluminum brackets, which are screwed in with these screws, and I'm ready to go. I put a coat of primer and a coat of gloss white paint on it, and it actually won't be visible because it's going to be back kind of where that satellite dish is, but you know, if you're up on the roof, it would look awesome. So that's what makes everything possible. This is like the flux capacitor of this whole project. So huge shout out to my cousin, man. Really appreciate what he did for me here.
Your cousin from Boston.
Okay, so here it is. So what I did was I went in 1 centimeter from these air drain holes, and on both sides made a mark, and then I just used a piece of stock, like, you know, it's like card stock. You know, thicker than a piece of paper. It's about the, you know, like a business card kind of feel to it. Yeah, so now the next thing I'll do is bust out the Dremel and cut this motor section out. I couldn't help but notice the last thing I did was I cut some metal. With this, I got my money's worth out of that one, huh? Look at that. So I'm going to switch the blade out to a plastic blade, and then we'll start cutting. Not to toot my own horn, but yeah, I don't think it could have gone any better or had a cut that's more precise. I've seen a couple people do this on the internet, and none of theirs looks as good as mine. So I'm going to cut this wire going to the motor. Now, everybody else cuts this Ethernet cable, and they put a you know, a standard Cat 6 jack on it. No, I haven't seen anyone actually try to get the proprietary Starlink out of this tube. But since this is just junk now anyway, I may switch blades on this Dremel to a metal blade and dissect this tube, because if I can get that proprietary cable out and use it, then I don't have to splice into it, and I can keep everything using the proprietary couplings that Starlink has with this unit. So I'm going to try it. What's the worst that can happen? If it doesn't work, I'll just cut the Ethernet cable like everybody else does, and I'll crimp a new Cat 6 connector on it. So we'll see what happens next.
Yeah, listen, we fucked up. Things got out of control, and
well, Little Trouble in Paradise. My cuts went okay, but as I cut here on this side, I realized I may have gone down a little too far, because when I look, I have to be very, very close to nicking that cable, and I can't really tell if I nicked it or not. There's just no way to know. So I'm just going to have to wait and see. If I hook it up and I don't have good connectivity, good speeds, it doesn't come online at all, then I'm going to know that I nicked that cable, and I'm going to have to go back and probably cut a little bit more of the back out to get deeper into it, and splice that cable further in towards the board. So I'll find out here pretty soon if I nicked it or not. So it's time for the next phase. These are the wires that went to the motor, and I've got a nick on one of them. I suspect I did that, but it's no big deal. So I'm going to run some shrink wrap over that, and then I'm going to shrink wrap the ends of both of these miniature cables here and get that all taped down, because we will never be using those anymore. So that's the next step in our process. So we've got that all heat shrinked up, and now I'm going to kind of just tack it down with a piece of Gorilla Tape, and then I'll be done with that. So there it is. Motor wires are all isolated. So here's what the proprietary Starlink connector looks like. Obviously quite different than an RJ45. And what Starlink uses for a cable is actually Cat 5e, but boy, they put a really durable jacket on it. So I got to cut this off, and I'm going to do that now, and crimp a new RJ45 connector on there. If you don't know how to do that, there's a ton of videos online on how to crimp an RJ45 connector onto a network cable. I'm not going to get into that. So I finished cutting those cables and crimping on those RJ45 connectors, which, by the way, if you're going to do this, you need to be aware that SpaceX uses a non-standard color combination for their RJ45. Well, I'm sorry, not for their RJ45, because they don't use those, but for their proprietary jacks, which of course I'm converting to RJ45. And yeah, you can look that up. It's I believe it's orange stripe, orange, blue stripe, green, green stripe, blue, brown stripe, brown. That's what it is. So obviously non-standard. But anyway, I mocked this up, and I ran the line up here through the window of my office into the modem to see if I was able to get online and check the performance. Yeah, 106 megabytes per second is what it's checking out as. So it's good to go. Good to mount up on the roof of the RV. So I need to clarify something, because it's probably, if you're thinking of doing this, it's probably causing some confusion, and I want to explain something. So if you're wondering why I'm cutting this Starlink cable and converting it to RJ45, the reason is that I had to on the dish side, on the dish out there. Because if you remember, I cut the back open, and I think I said something about I was going to maybe try and cut the tube down and see if I could dissect it and get the proprietary cable out. I didn't even attempt that because when I looked a little bit closer, I nicked the Ethernet cable when I cut the back off. So that may be why no one else does it. I think it'd be almost impossible to take that back off without nicking the cable because they kind of wrap it twice around the top. The only way I think you could do it is if you made a real small cut, maybe with a hole saw, and then you went in there with a tool, maybe I don't know, some kind of crevice tool or something, and you pulled down on that Ethernet cable as you were cutting it with the Dremel. You could probably do it that way. But I nicked it, so it was moot at that point. It's like, you know, there was no reason to cut that tube open and try and salvage the jack. And no one else has done that I've seen. But anyway, so that's the reason on that end. I had to do it on that end. The reason I'm cutting it on this end is simply because this comes with 50 feet of cable. And, you know, it's, what am I going to do with 50 feet of cable? I've got to put 50 feet of cable somewhere. I could put it up on top of the motorhome and just, I guess, zip tie it up there somehow or whatever. That'd be just stupid and dumb. Or I could, you know, bring the majority of that 50 feet back into the motorhome through the roof and put it in my equipment bay where my Starlink modem is going to be. Also, not cool. Yeah, so I just wanted to make it clean, and because the Starlink, even though it's really durable cable, durable jacket, they use a 26 gauge wires for their Ethernet cable, and they're hard to crimp, in my opinion. And so I got some Cat 6 from my son-in-law. He gave me a bunch of Cat 6 the other day, and it's 23 gauge. It's going to be easier for me to crimp. So yeah, I'm going to have, instead of having a 50-foot run, and I'm sure there's some loss in there because of that, I'm going to have about a 10-foot run. So that's the reason for cutting it and converting it to the RJ45. Now, here's another really important thing I didn't really explain, and people are probably maybe thinking, why is he making a point to tell us this? So a couple minutes ago, I talked about Starlink using a proprietary, or not proprietary, but they use a non-standard color code for their Ethernet cable. And really, you probably think, well, what difference does that make? Yeah, I could arrange those wires any way I wanted to, eeny, meeny, miny, moe, and as long as I did it the same way at the other end, it would be fine. And that's true. That's all true. But here's the deal. And we're actually someone that could easily get away with doing that. And I even thought about just going with standard color code. But I decided to stick with the Starlink non-standard. And the reason I did is, if you ever decide to dump the Starlink modem, and you don't need this modem, all the brains of this thing are out there in the array. This modem it's actually not very good. It's not a very good modem. It's clumsy and clunky. It falls over easy. I mean, it looks cool. You know, it looks cool and sleek when it's up on a shelf, but you know, if it's up in an equipment cabinet in an RV and, you know, you're driving and taking turns or whatever, it's not good. It's, you know, and the range on them isn't very good, and it looks a lot better than it performs. Let's just say that. And you don't need it. I could take that Ethernet cable now that I've converted it to RJ45. I could take the Ethernet cable off of this Starlink satellite dish and plug it right into some kind of aftermarket modem, like these MoFi modems. Now, these are really good modems. and for a couple reasons. Number one, they have a lot better range. Number two, they have all these different inputs, so you can set it up if you have a a hotspot, maybe your phone, a hotspot. You got your Starlink. You could prioritize it, so it'll grab whatever best signal, not best signal, but it'll prioritize it. So, for example, if you're going through really heavy, dense forest or whatever, and you're not getting a good Starlink signal, it could switch over to LTE with these. Yeah, these are just way better modems, so much more versatile. And the other great thing about these modems is they run on 12 volts, whereas this, as you know, has to be plugged into a wall outlet and get 120 volts. Now that's kind of not totally true, because I could actually take one of these guitar strings down here, like a high E string, a real thin string, and go right on the front of this, and I could peel this case back. And inside, there are actually jumpers to convert this to 12 volt. They're already here and they're already in it. But why? You know, it's like, before I would go through all that trouble, I would probably just go get one of these MoFis and then a cheap power inserter, because you would have to insert 12 volts, 12 or maybe even 48 volts up the line to the dish, but that's no big deal. You just do that with a power inserter, so that's no big deal. But anyway, but the reason why the short answer to the long explanation is, the reason why you want to keep that goofy Starlink non-standard color coding on the Ethernet cable is because if you don't, and you dump that Starlink modem and you go with a MoFi, you won't be able to just unplug that Ethernet cable and plug it right in here. It won't work. But because, like in my case, I stuck with the goofy Starlink color-coded Ethernet, I can plug it right in now to a MoFi and it would work just fine. For us, it's, it doesn't matter that this is has to be plugged into the wall, 120 volts, because we have a residential fridge in our coach. So we need to have our inverter on really like 24/7, or be plugged into shore power, or be running our generator. I mean, we very rarely, really never go to where 120 volts at an outlet isn't available. And with our lithium battery setup now, we can basically go 24 hours running our fridge, the modem, TV, not air conditioners, of course, but all of our electronics we can run, and the fridge, for 24 hours off our lithium batteries. And that's no big deal. So anyway, that's the reason for sticking with the SpaceX color coding, and that's the reason for the conversion from their proprietary plugs to an RJ45. Okay, it's time for the next step here. Converted both of these to RJ45, and I have a waterproof coupler here. And now I'm going to put that coupler up in this void here in the dish, and then secure it with these zip ties. Okay, so just did that. There it is. It's secure in there. Getting down to the last couple steps before we mount this on the roof. I've got it all sealed up with Gorilla Tape. That's really not required. A lot of people just leave it open, and it's no problem doing so, but I wanted to do it. Anyway, I also took 100 grit sandpaper, and I just kind of scuffed up the edges here, so they have a little bit more grab there with the adhesive when I mount this thing in the cradle. But it looks like the next steps will be heading up to the roof with the cradle, and getting it mounted up there to the RV roof. Well, our next phase has us up here on the roof, or has me up on the roof of the RV. I've got it all laid out here, getting ready to mount it. But it's a nice morning here in Arizona. It's about 6:30 in the morning. It's going to be hot today, so I want to get this done early. So I pre-marked it. I pre-drilled with really small drill bit just to kind of get it going. I've dabbed it with silicone at each of the 8 drill locations, and then I made a bead all the way around the bracket, which should give us a good seal, prevent any water from getting down into those screws. So this phase is over. It's all screwed down with 8 number 10 sheet metal screws and the ring of caulk around each one of the brackets, and then there's some silicone caulk down in the screw hole. So I believe that's going to be very weatherproof. And then of course I'm going to come back after this cures later this afternoon, and I'm going to hit the top of these brackets with Dicor lap sealant. Once I get that done, I'll mount the dish permanently in the cradle. Well, I'm pulling this wire down here from the flat mounted Starlink. What a pain in the ass, and it didn't need to be this way. So this is what I'm dealing with right now. And the reason for that is our coach came pre-wired, and if you look up here, yeah, so it came pre-wired, you know, with access to the roof for the satellite, which when the guy put the satellite up, he didn't use. He drilled his own holes, and he came down over here, so I had to pull these outlets out, you know, to follow the same chase that he used, that he put in. I thought about using the factory one, but I didn't want to drill another hole in the RV roof. So I ended up just using what he used when he installed the RV. But yeah, what a waste. It's like, I guess he didn't know it was pre-wired, but you know, he's a professional. It's all he does is install those systems. So you think he would know that or whatever. So it was a pain. So I had to, you know, disconnect all these outlets and pull it through. And now this rat's nest here, I got to get it all neat and back. You know, it's not a big deal. It's just time, right? So it's going to take me about 20 minutes to put it all back together. So that's what I'm doing now. Got the panel all back together. Got the modem in here. Wire's been run, plugged it in. I just need to stuff the wires up in there, but I've got it connected up. Turned it on, and it's all good. So the only last thing to do is to put the Sikaflex sealant on the cradle and seal the dish to the cradle up on the roof. And then this project will be done. It was pretty warm up there and it was kind of messy, so I didn't really shoot any video of putting that bead of Sikaflex down. I ever think everybody gets that. But the one thing I did do is I cut 6 really small little strips of this 3M VHB tape. It's, you know, sticky on both sides. And by the way, wear gloves. I didn't have any gloves. I had them. I didn't bring them up there with me. And I had a hard time with this stuff sticking to my fingers. But anyway, I did like 6 small little strips. Maybe they were about, I don't know, 1 centimeter and a half maybe, by 4 or 5 centimeters. And I put 1 each on the short ends, and then I put 2 on the long ends. Just to kind of lift that dish off a hair. I mean, maybe 1/3 of a millimeter, hardly anything, because that tape's really thin. But just enough to where that there would be a Sikaflex adhesive between the cradle and the dish. In other words, I didn't want the dish to come all the way down onto the cradle and then just have all the sealant or the adhesive just, you know, kind of squish out the sides. So this just put just ever so slightly of a void there so that there would be a little bit of room for that Sikaflex to flex, because that's what it's supposed to be good for. So you want to pick up a roll of this. I think, personally, I think it's better that way, but Probably don't have to, but anyway, it's 3M, and I think they call this VHB tape. I don't know what that stands for, but that's what they call it. Well, so there it is, final product. I've got I got some weight on top of it for a couple days or a day, 24 hours. But I think the fit and finish is good, and the black, it blends right into the roof cap and the air conditioning unit behind it. So that's how you flat mount a Starlink antenna on your RV.